What's up, guys? It's the Coaster Battleman here, back at it with a new video. This is going to be a pretty negative video, and this is the 15 worst roller coasters I have ridden. This is my 2018 edition. I hope you guys enjoy. Let's get started with number 15, and it is Nighthawk at Carowinds. And this ride, I'm going to break down the positives real quick. The positives: this coaster has a very nice color scheme, and it's over the water, and that's the only positives of this ride. And it kind of exceeded my expectations. I thought this coaster would be way higher on the list, but this ride is just horrible. Like, not really horrible, but it's just kind of meh. It's super shaky, and it's not really a headbanger, I would say, but this coaster is just super shaky, and it's just overall not the greatest. It's just kind of eh. And the lines and the capacity for it were pretty bad. Number 14 is Cedar Creek Mine Ride, and I've only ridden this coaster twice at Cedar Point, and both times I've ridden it, I thought the same thing. It's pretty bland, it's pretty rough, it's just, I don't know, it's just not that fun. Cedar Creek Mine Ride, it's rough, not the most enjoyable, and it's been at the park since 1969, so you can imagine that this coaster has gotten a lot rougher over a course of half a century, but this ride is still a very iconic coaster to Cedar Point, so they probably won't remove it, but if they did, it would be really nice to get a massive B&M flyer in its place. But Cedar Creek Mine Ride, it's a decent ride. I wouldn't say it's the worst on this list, but I would say it's pretty bland, it's rough, and it's easily the worst mine train I've ridden. It's just, eh. Number 13 is Flight of Fear, and Flight of Fear at Kings Island and Kings Dominion are combined into one because these rides are the definition of inconsistent. They have a really awesome launch. I really like the launch on both these rides, but the restraints are just garbage. I really hate the lap bars because on some rides on Flight of Fear, like, I've had my foot just completely hurt the whole time we were riding, and it would just ruin the ride. And then other times the ride would just be so shaky I'd be flying around. And this ride was so inconsistent. Like, I never knew what kind of pain I would experience on it. And just overall, this ride, even the Flight of Fears have pretty cool theming. They're just really inconsistent rides, and they're just not good. Like, I've ridden the Joker at Six Flags America, Joker's Jinx, and that ride was actually really fun, and I rode it twice, and it was actually a consistent ride, and I thought it was super fun. But the Flight of Fears, I don't know what it is about them, but they just aren't that great. Number 12 is in Vertigo, and this ride is at Kings Island. It's really inconsistent, as well as the Flight of Fears, but most of the time I'm going to be getting a bad ride on Vertigo, and I've only gotten like a few good rides on it out of all the times I've ridden it. I've only gotten like 1 or 2 good rides, and then every other ride's been just horrible on it. This coaster, I mean, it has potential, but it's just not the smoothest, and it's just, I don't know, it's just, you can get some pretty bad head banging on this coaster when you get a bad ride on it, but when you get a good ride, you don't really get that much headbanging at all, and it's super fun and intense. And Vertigo has some positives, but the negatives definitely outweigh them, so that's why it's on this list. And the capacity is pretty bad for this ride as well, because it only runs one train. Number 11 is the Dark Knight, and this is the Wild Mouse coaster at Six Flags Great America, and this is just a bad ride. I really do not like this ride at all. Well, I actually do kind of like parts of it. The trains are really well themed. You have a very nicely themed. The ride is actually really well themed. Like, the queue line and the overall experience is just themed super well. And it's an indoor roller coaster, so It's going to be climate controlled for the summertime and in the colder months. So the Dark Knight, there's positives with this ride, but the negatives are that parts of the ride are super rough. I'm talking about the jerky hills that it has at the end of the ride. Oh my gosh, those things are super painful and really put this coaster on this list. Number 10 is Ricochet, and now we're starting to get into really bad rides. Like, this coaster was just, after the lift hill, just flat out horrible. The switchbacks were garbage. The small drops it had and the little bunny hops it had. Oh my gosh, this coaster was so jerky. I just could not stand this ride, and I only rode it the one time at Carowinds on day one and never rode it again. So I just did not like this coaster. Just never riding it again. Number 9 is the Boss, and this is before 2018 renovations, and I'm talking about in 2016 and 2017. Like, in 2015 and earlier than that, I loved this coaster and was an awesome front row experience. But when I tried it in other rows, I just did not like it. Like, it was super rough. The layout, I think, is decent, but just the overall smoothness killed this coaster for me when I was in any other row but the front row, and I could not stand the roughness. Number 8 is Hoosier Hurricane, and this is another one of those Woodies where you're in the front row, you'll get a decent ride, and then every other row is just horrible. Like, front row I thought was okay, and any other row was just plain awful. This coaster has steel supports because it does go over the water, which is really iconic for Indiana Beach. It's a pretty iconic ride there, but other than that, this coaster is just not good, and it has a terrible capacity because they only ran one train when I was there on like every coaster except Steelhawk and Tiger, and just the operations were just flat out horrible. Number 7 is Vortex, and this is the B&M stand-up at Carowinds. This coaster has some solid things going for it. Like, the first time I rode it, I thought the drop and the vertical loop were just awesome. Like a B&M floorless or invert or any other model with a kind of start like that with a pre-drop, the drop, and the vertical loop. I thought it was pretty similar, and then after that, my head was getting smashed all over the place, but that first small section I loved a lot, and then the second time I rode this coaster, everything was just horrible. I don't know if it was where I was standing at, or what row I was in, or the position of my body, but it was just such a horrible ride. I really did not like this coaster at all. Just such a terrible ride at Carowinds. I really hope it gets the floorless treatment in 2020 or 2021. Number 6 is Corks at Cedar Point, and this coaster is really iconic to Cedar Point. It dominates the midway area it's on, and it has a beautiful color scheme and some really nice looking trains, but other than that, this coaster just has terrible track profiling, and the elements just aren't that good. Like, the vertical loop's the only decent element on this coaster, I would say, and the first drop. And even the first drop is just so small, it's just not that great. Like, the vertical loop's the only decent element on here, and then everything else is it's just not good. Number 5 is the original Mean Streak at Cedar Point, and now as Steel Vengeance, this is the second best coaster I've ever ridden, and it's world class. But Mean Streak, when I rode it, it was on its last legs as a roller coaster, and it would be closing in 2016, and it was easily one of the worst coasters I've ridden, period. Like, this coaster is just, it was rough, it was boring, like, it was just turn after turn after turn through this long, like, 3-minute ride. It was just such a boring ride. Front row was okay, but it was just so boring, I couldn't really enjoy it. And then third row, I tried it in third row, super rough, and it was boring as heck. Number 4 is Ninja, and this coaster is just flat out just a terrible ride. There's some pretty bad head and neck banging on here. And the elements and the layout are good. It's just that this coaster has some very bad track profiling, and this is a Vekoma MK1200, so it's really bad. It has some terrible elements. Like, the corkscrews are bad, the vertical loop is just the only, like, okay element on here, and then just the inversions are bad, the drop's bad, the turns are bad. This is just a bad ride. Number 3 is Apocalypse at Six Flags America, formerly Iron Wolf, and this is the other stand-up coaster I've ridden, and this was just a terrible ride. Like, the theming was decent, but other than that, this coaster was just horrible. And I'm really happy that Six Flags America had no lines, because if I waited a super long line for this, it definitely wouldn't have been worth it. Like, I just walked right on, and this coaster was just horrible. I'm really happy they're changing it into a floorless, but this coaster, my head was getting smashed all over the place, left to right, just the whole ride. It was just a terrible ride, and it was just not good. Just, no, Apocalypse, really bad. Number 2 is Wolverine Wildcat, and this is another one of those Woodies where front row was kind of it was okay, and then every other row was just so bad. And Wolverine Wildcat, the layout has tons of potential as an RMC, but I don't think Michigan's Adventure will get a new coaster anytime soon, because Cedar Fair has been treating the park pretty badly in these past few years, or for quite a long time actually. And Wolverine Wildcat, it definitely deserves to be RMC'd, and this coaster is just horrible, super rough, and the lift hill is the best part of the ride. And the worst coaster I've ridden that has finally beaten Wolverine Wildcat. This is the ride that has finally beaten it as the worst coaster I've ridden, Mind Eraser at Six Flags America, and I just hate this ride so much. And it was just my left side of my head getting smashed on the restraints. It was just kind of, and if you guys have earbuds, try and lower the volume here. Like, this is basically what the head banging was like. Just head banging. My head was getting smashed all over the place. And this coaster has a decent layout, and I thought Thunderhawk at Michigan's Adventure, another Vekoma SLC, was decent when I rode it in 2016 and 2015, like a few years ago. But this ride is just horrible. Like, the smoothness and just execution of this ride, and being a Vekoma, definitely makes this coaster such a bad experience, and my left ear hurt for 10 minutes straight, like after Mind Eraser we left the park. And this ride, basically until we got into our rental car, this coaster made my ear hurt for like 10 to 15 minutes after the ride ended. And oh my gosh, this coaster, easily the worst coaster I've ridden. Super painful, just so bad, and easily the worst coaster at Six Flags America. And oh my gosh, Vekoma SLCs, I did not realize how bad they were until I rode this, but I've ridden only 2. Who knows how the other ones are? You just gotta ride them and try them out to experience them for yourselves. Thank you guys so much for watching. Stay tuned for more videos.